This is a Yeshir on Likutei Sichos Chelek Chaf, the 20th book of Likutei Sichos, Vayera, the third Sikha. Very important Sikha because here we're going to discuss the concept of Kiddush Hashem, concept of self-sacrifice, what we call in English being a martyr, and the special meaning that that has in from the perspective of halacha, from the perspective of being a yid. Of course, before we even start, we want to say that when we talk about Mesirut Nefesh, giving up the life, Mesirut Nefesh, Nefesh also means Rotzain, will. Really, what we're hoping is that we should be able to do a Kiddush Hashem, we should be able to sanctify Hashem's name in a living way. We should be living heroes, not Chas v'Shalom heroes that gave up our life literally, give up the wants of our life and so on. Aleph, paragraph 1. When we talk about the Nisayon of the Akedah, the test of the Akedah, we know that Hashem gave Avraham Avinu 10 tests. We said in Pirkei Avos that Asara Nisyonot Nitnasa Avraham Avinu was tested with 10 tests, and he withstood all of them. So the Gemara says that the language used by the Nisayon of the Akedah is Kach na et bincha et yichidcha. It's na means bevakasha, please. Can I say a joke? In England, I was very, very upset at the GPS. You know why? Because it's different than the American GPS. The American GPS, you tell them, I want to go to 31st Avenue. He gets you there. He says, turn right, turn left, go straight. In England, please turn right. I asked you to take me there, but that please, to me, seems out of place. When Hashem's giving you a test, what's the please? So what is Lashon Bakasha? The Gemara says, Nisiticha bekama nisyonot. I've tested you in so many tests, 9 already. V'amadta b'kolam, and you withstood all of them. Achshav amod li b'nisayon zeh shelo yomru ein mamash b'rishonim. Please withstand this test. They shouldn't say that the first ones were not really an achievement. They weren't really an accomplishment. So you have to understand, what does that mean? That we would have looked, if we wouldn't have overcome the 10th test, the Nisayon HaAkedah, to offer up his son, we would have said the other ones were no achievement. So we have to understand, what is the reason that when Avraham would not have overcome or withstood successfully the Nisayon, the test of the Akedah, we would have said, Ein mamash barishonim, that there's nothing in the earlier achievements that he had. The first Nisyonot that he withstood, the first tests, we're not an achievement. Why not? Why couldn't we just say that he had self-sacrificed till 90%, right? It doesn't mean to say that all the previous tests were of no value. Especially, we all understand that this test of the Akedah, the test of offering up his beloved child Yitzchak, was obviously the most difficult of all tests. So why would we not say, why does the Gemara say, Hashem is saying, please fulfill this, otherwise your whole credibility from all the previous 9 nisyonot, 9 tests will be erased. Why? What can we say? He did, okay, you're not perfect. The last 10%, 25%, 50%, whatever it is, you didn't achieve, but the earlier ones are not called into question. So here in the footnote that Rebbe points out, footnote 6, maybe we could say that what's so radically different about the Nisayon of the Akedah, what's radically different is what it's requiring from Avraham Avinu to be, it's requiring for him the midah that's antithetical, that's not his usual mode. His usual mode is chesed. If you tell Avraham Avinu, give everything away, okay, that's him. If you tell him, now go and do something which is perceived as cruel, kill your beloved child, that's not an act of chesed, that's an act of gevura. That's an act that it doesn't denote ahava, denotes yira, not love, but fear. So many places we say that what the pasuk says, atayadati with an eye. Now I know, says Hashem, after you did you were ready to offer up your son, that you're God-fearing. God-fearing, because till now I knew you love me. Now I know you fear me, you have all for me. You're ready to do gevura. You're even ready to do something totally against your nature, Avraham Avinu. However, You ask a good question. Still says the Rebbe in the Hara, the footnote. That's a good point. That tells us that without him doing this test, we wouldn't know that he has the capacity to totally transform himself for Hashem and do gvura, not just chesed, to do strictness, not just kindness. But still, let's go back to the original 9 tests and let's start with Ur Kazdim, the fact that he agreed to allow himself to be thrown into a fire because he didn't want to deny Hashem. That, even if it's not a total transformation of his nature, but it shows how totally committed he is to Hashem. It's an Nisayan nonetheless, so it still doesn't answer. Again, even if we explain that the Nisayan of the Akedah, the test of the Akedah is different, not just in its kamus, not just in the intensity of it, but even in the qualitative aspect. It shows you that Abraham has to reach to somewhere which is totally against his nature. Still, that doesn't answer why the Gemara would say Ein mamash barishonim, that if he doesn't survive this test, the earlier tests are not worth anything. Why not? Base. The general story of the Akedah, which, to paraphrase the lashon of the Abarbanel, when he explains that we say this every day, Kol Keren Yisrael is chutam, the whole glory of Israel and their merit before Avim Shoshmaim, before Hashem, is the Akedah. We're still so proud. This is our pride that our ancestor Avraham Avinu was ready to offer up his son. That's why every day we talk about the Akedah. So it's well known, the question. What's the question that's well known? Rabbi quotes it from Ikrim and other svarim. Why do we always talk about the Akedah, about Avram offering up Yitzchak, more than Akedat kol hachasidim v'akdoshim shemasru atzmam al kedushat Hashem yitbarach? More than all the other pious people who gave their name up for Hashem, like Rabbi Akiva and his friends, yeah, like those that gave up their life throughout history. And the best example is Rabbi Akiva and his colleagues, the 10 Harugei Malchus, the 10 people that we describe on Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippur as being martyrs, being killed by the government because of their connection to Hashem. Why don't we talk about them? Well, you say, well, Avraham Avinu, yeah, but when we ask, why don't we talk about them? You can say, okay, if I would talk about them, if we would every day in davening remember Rabbi Akiva and his colleagues who gave up their life for Hashem, you would ask me, why don't you talk about Avraham? No, but that's not a question. I'll tell you why it would be more value, perhaps, to talk about Rabbi Akiva v'Chai. You know why? Because Avraham Avinu wasn't such a big deal in a sense. I don't want to say these words, but if you think about it, but Avraham, Hashem spoke to him and he says, please, 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 take your child and offer him up. These other Kedoshim, these other holy people, Rabbi Akiva and the people that martyred themselves for Hashem, they didn't get a direct instruction. They read in the Torah, they knew, but it was not an instruction with a no, please do this. So Avraham Avinu, understandably, he did what he had to do. And you can't answer that giving up your only child, and only, well, for him, Yosef Yishmael, but giving up a person's own child on Kiddush Hashem is much more difficult and much deeper than for the person to be Meisa Nefesh himself, for himself to give up his own life, which is the reality, for sure. So you would say, well, Rabbi Akiva gave up his own life. Avraham was ready to take the life of his son. 1 second. Because also in many later generations, we know famously the story of Chana and her 7 sons. You know the story of Chana and her 7 sons? That in the story of Chanukah, Chana was brought before the king with her 7 sons, and one by one she had to witness. Each one was given the offer: you're going to bow to the idol, or your life is going to be taken. And each one says, we're going to bow to the idol. The last son, the king gave him a way out. The Medrash says that he said, you'll be able to, I'm going to drop my ring, you'll bow down to pick up my ring, and I'll consider it as if you bow down to the idol. He says, no, I'm not doing that. And he also got killed. After that, what did Chana say? Here's a quote from the Gemara in Gittin: Ata Avraham akadeta mizbeach echad. You brought one offering on the mizbeach. V'ani akadeti shiva mizbechot. I offered up 7 sacrifices before you, Hashem. Chana and her 7 sons. Similarly, there are other examples of times of shmad, times of where people were coerced into serving idols, where the Jewish people didn't just give up their own lives, they took the lives of their children also, as is well known. So here in the Rebbe in Ha'ar 15, brings, first of all, you can see it in the books that discuss the history of those days, that people, and in the Kinnis of Tisha B'Av, we see sometimes people in the Gzeres of, I think it's Metz in Germany, the Middle Ages, where they were going to be forced to be baptized, to be coerced into idolatry, and they slaughtered each other. They slaughtered the children in order that children shouldn't fall into that. In the Beis Yosef, the Rebbe quotes here also in the Bedek Habayis, Beis Yosef quotes a hair-raising story. There was a story of one Rav who they were coming to coerce the children, to force the children into idolatry, into Avodah Zarah. And so he started shechting them. And there was another Rav there who said, "What are you doing? You're a murderer." And the Rav said about himself, if the one who, he said, I'm protecting them from not losing their connection to Hashem, stay alive and lose the connection. So that other Rav protested and said, if you're wrong by what you're doing, you should have a very misamishuni, you should have a extraordinarily unusual death. And indeed, he was caught later by the authorities, and his skin was flayed off. He was killed in an excruciatingly horrible way. And the Beis Yosef there in the Bedek Habayis seems to indicate maybe those children would have been saved. In other words, so he's not questioning. Interesting. It's not a question that in some cases it's considered a sacrifice. It's not necessarily the wrong thing. In his case, it seems it was the wrong thing, because maybe it wouldn't have come to that. They may yet have been saved from being killed and saved from being anyway. The details there, I'm not sure. I looked at it just very briefly in the Beis Yosef, but the point being, the Rebbe says there are other historical cases where people that did not have a direct instruction from Hashem gave up their lives and gave up their children's lives. So why is the story of Avraham Avinu still the catalyst, still the story we all talk about till today?
הכוונה של ניסיון של אברהם היה בגלל שקדוש ברוך הוא דיבר איתו, זה היה ניסיון פחות משזה,
It was ניסיון פחות. Well, it wasn't such a big test because he had a direct instruction. The other people didn't, and they sacrificed their kids also. You bring up a point that it was the first one we're going to talk about, but in the meantime, the Sefer Ikrim gives another explanation. He says that the Chidush, paragraph 3, the Chidush, the novelty of the Akedah of Yitzchak is in the fact. Listen to this. I'm going to paraphrase it. Lo nitarev b'poal ha'akedah shum hatzad hechrach klal. There was no hechrach, there was no requirement in the story of the Akedah. What does that mean? Ki afilu mitzvat Hashem yitbarach lo hayta machrachat oto. Even the instruction of Hashem didn't have to be read in a way that it would require him to do this without any way out. Zed var biyorei Rabbeinu Zal, our sages told us that later on when it says Hashem Yireh Hasel Olam, there's a dialogue that happens between Avraham Avinu and Hashem. What's the dialogue? Avraham said before Hashem, Ribono shel Olam galui v'yadu lefanecha, shebishah she'amarta li kachna et bincha et yechidcha she'atav Yitzchak v'aleu li la'olah. It's well known to you, Hashem, that when you told me, please offer up your son, your only son, the son you love, Yitzchak, and bring him up as a burnt offering. Hayiti yachol lomar v'lo kvar, amarta li ki v'Yitzchak yikare lecha zara. I could have challenged you and said, 1 second, Hashem, I'm ready to do whatever you want, but let me just ask a question. Didn't you tell me that Yitzchak will be my future? He will be my continuation? I didn't challenge you and ask you that question. I overcame my natural mercy for my son. I didn't have any second thoughts after your instructions. Says the Ikrim, we see clearly from this medrash, Afilu mitzad mitzvat Hashem yitbarach lo haya Avraham muchrach. Achar sheyah yachol yitnatzel al zeh mimenu b'tana amitit im ratzah. Avraham Avinu wasn't really coerced or forced. He could have challenged Hashem and said, 1 second, didn't you tell me this and this? And then Hashem would have said, you're right, I just wanted to test you. But he didn't. He said, Hashem said, I'm doing. And that's how the Ran, says the Rabbi here in square brackets, explains, why does it say Kachna, because Hashem is trying to indicate, please, if you don't want, I'll understand, but please. So that makes it even much greater about Avraham Avinu, that he was prepared to do whatever he understood that Hashem wants without looking for a way out. However, the other Kedoshim, the other holy martyrs that gave up their lives for Hashem in the later generations, they did it because Hashem has an instruction. There it's not, there's no optional. It says, Hashem says that I want to be sanctified within the Bnei Yisrael. In other words, if there's a choice between keeping your life but giving up Hashem, or giving up your life and staying ne'eman to Hashem, you have to stay, can't do a chil Hashem, you have to make a kiddush Hashem, you have to show that Hashem is the dearest thing for you, even more than life. Okay, so l'chayra we have an answer. Why do we talk about Avraham Avinu? Because he did it without being instructed. He's even greater. Says the Rebbe, that's not really a sufficient answer. Why not? Because first of all, it's funny to say, it's a doichik, it's not so clear to say, it's not so easy to say that since he could have asked, didn't you tell me that Yitzchak would be my future? That means he wasn't really obligated to do it, but because once Hashem asked him to do it, even if he asked him to do it in a way that there could be an argument or a discussion, but it is a hechrech, especially by Avraham Avinu. If Avraham Avinu hears these words from Hashem, Kachnat bincha, yes, he could have asked, 1 second, how does that make sense? But for Avraham Avinu hearing these words, it's difficult to say that this means it's totally voluntary. It showed that he heard Hashem say, Kachnat bincha, please. For somebody, the stature of Avraham Avinu is just like a hechel, just like he's forced to do it. Also, we know that there were other Kedoshim between the other martyrs that we have in our history. There were those that didn't have to give up their lives for Hashem. On the contrary, they maybe even were obligated, according to halacha, to look for a heter, to look for a way out, not to give up their life. Like we know there's a discussion in halacha. We know there are some cases which is yehareg v'al yavor. Clearly, you have to allow yourself to be killed and not violate the Vayera. Shlosha dvarim. There are other things and other circumstances where the din is yavor v'al yareg, that you're supposed to violate and not be killed. If it's not, and yet we see that there were many kedoshim that, although they weren't obligated, they gave up their life in order to sanctify Hashem's name, even in places that they could have looked for ways out that maybe they're not obligated. We know there's a machlekes, there's a shakta v'tarya, there's a machlekes already in the Rishonim, but whether a person is allowed to give up his life. In other words, when it says like this, that in all the mitzvahs of the Torah, you give up, you violate and don't give up your life, except for the three, which is idolatry and murder and adultery. For those, somebody says, kill somebody else or you'll be killed. You have to allow yourself to be killed, God forbid. So, or bow to the idol, you'll be killed. That's kiddush Hashem. Those things you have to give up your life for. The other things, you don't have to. The question is, you don't have to? Somebody says, either you eat this piece of pork or he's going to kill you, God forbid. You eat it or you don't eat it. So the halacha says you don't have to. You don't have to be killed. Question is, what happens if the person is pious and he says, I can't do this. Do whatever you want. I'm not gonna put something safe in my body and break my connection to Hashem. So is that permissible or not? It's machlekes rishonim. In other words, for sure it's not obligated. But maybe Shasik says something else. Sure, it's not obligated, but am I allowed to? So, in other words, there are many people in our history, in our rich history of Kiddush Hashem, that have given up their lives even when they didn't have to. So that couldn't be the one distinction that makes a distinction about Avraham Avinu, because there are many others like that. Okay, so now we're going to get to the fact that he was the first. Paragraph 4. We know the explanation that's brought in many places in Chassidus, and that is Avraham Avinu's greatness was that he was the first. He was the first person to withstand a challenge to life, to his own life, and be prepared to give up literally his life for Hashem. Any beginning, as we know, kol ha'atchalot kashot, all beginnings are difficult. Any time you need to open up and initiate and do something that's never been done before, difficult. Once it's been done, it can be followed. We know there are many parallels to this, even in mundane life. So now that Avraham Avinu, who was the first one to ever have Mesirut Nefesh, self-sacrifice for Hashem, after he did it, Patachet Hatzinor, he opened up the flow, he opened up the pipe for anybody else to be able to do it as well. Now in the world, there's been drawn down the world, the koach, the ability to have Mesirut Nefesh, somebody should be so motivated, should be so taken with his belief, should be so full of belief that he's ready even to give up his life for his belief in Hashem. And now it's a lot easier because Now, Avraham Avinu, so to speak, brought it down in the potential. We know it's been done. It's here in the world. It's available. Now, the person that does it, it's not like he hasn't achieved something. He has achieved, but he's achieved bringing something from koyach to poel, from potential to actuality, not to create something new, to generate something new that's not even there in potential. However, it's not understood. So that's usually the answer given in Chassidus. That is, that he's the first. And that's what we keep talking about him. He's the first. And with his koach, we've done it throughout our history after that. However, we still need to understand, says the Rebbe, the concept of Mesiras Nefesh, self-sacrifice, was drawn down by Avraham Avinu earlier than the Nisayona Akedah, than the test of the offering up Yitzchak. Why? We know the test we all talk about very often is Ur Kasdim, that Avraham Avinu was, with self-sacrifice, he destroyed all kinds of idolatrous things, Avodah Zarah, and he spread forth Hashem's name in the world, till, as the Rambam says it in the book of Halachas, Bikesh HaMelech Lahargay, the king, Nimrod at that time, wanted to kill him, he had a miracle. So he was thrown into the fiery furnace and he was saved. More than that, the Nisayan of Ur Kasdim, the Nisayan, the test of not backing down, even when he was threatened to be thrown into a fire, seems to be even more strong than the test of the Akedah. Why? Because the test of Akedah was after Hashem spoke to him. In the Sayin of Ur Kasdim, Hashem had never spoken to him yet. He had come to an understanding of Hashem. He had come to realize that there's a truth, and he was ready to give up his life for Hashem's truth. So, 1 second. If we're saying that the Mesiras Nefesh, the sacrifice of Avraham Avinu, was not in its first stage, the Akedah, but rather it was when he was thrown into the fiery furnace. So why do we have a question? So why do we talk so much about the Akedah? We could talk about Avraham Avinu. Why don't we talk about his being thrown into the furnace? If we want to talk about the one who opened up the channel and the pipe for Mesiras Nefesh. Paragraph 5. So we'll understand this by first understanding in general what is the chidush, what is so new, what is so unique about what we call in Judaism Mesirut Nefesh, self-sacrifice. Because from the explanation that we've said now, that the greatness of Avraham is that he opened up the possibility for Mesirut Nefesh, for giving up your life for Hashem, it sounds like it's a new thing. It's an Abrahamic thing. It's something that Avraham brings to the world. It doesn't exist outside the Avraham tradition. Why not? So the explanation for this is because Mesiras Nefesh, what does it mean in actuality? Bitul hayesh v'hametzius. It means this cancellation of the person's own identity and own ego. Because a nivra, by definition, when we talk about created beings, Hashem is the creator, and he creates people, created beings. What does a created being mean? It means that he is defined, the creator has created something that is a reality, a yesh, a metzius, an ego, an existence. It has its own presence. So we understand that a created being cannot, with his own power, achieve a level that's higher than its own existence. Similar to what we say, Ein chavush matir atzmo. Somebody who's in prison cannot untie himself. He's tied up. How can he untie himself? So let's understand this for a second. The concept of Mesirut Nefesh is that my presence is not important if I can't be part of Hashem's presence. And if it's going to be disconnect from Hashem or take my life is not a life without connection to Hashem. Now, really what that says is that I've jumped beyond my own definition of self. Let's understand this. I'll first say it by a very silly example. The guy comes and says, your money or your life? Hold up, your money or your life? He says, my life. I'm saving my money to have a holiday. I don't want to lose my money. If you don't have your life, you don't have your whole existence to be able to have a holiday. So what are we going to say? Are you going to give up your contact to Hashem or you're going to live? Say, no, I'm not going to live. I'm going to give my contact. But then you won't be. We know that one of the most intrinsic, one of the most ingrained natures of a living organism is the desire to live. That's why the whole concept of bacteria is spreading and growing and viruses, living beings, living organisms want to continue to multiply and grow and so on. A person wants to live by definition. It's the most ingrained thing in his life. When we say Mesirut Nefesh, what we're saying is that the person is ready to walk away from that. But if he's ready to walk away from that, then he's no longer. So technically, it's impossible for a person to wish himself into oblivion. The example I think in Begashmias is if a person can hold his breath to the point where he'll faint. If a person can, if he has enough willpower, I'm not talking chas v'shalom if he puts something on from the outside. That's something else. Somebody can suffocate himself, God forbid. I'm talking just simply he's breathing and then he wills himself not to breathe. The most he can will himself not to breathe is to faint. The moment he faints, what happens? Automatically he starts breathing. His mechanism goes in because there's a I think this is pshat. There's a built-in mechanism in Metzias that Metzias protects itself. The moment you talk about Mesiras Nefesh, this is a gift. This has to be a koach from somewhere else, says that. Makom acher, to be able that the person should be able to jump into higher than himself, to be able to choose to be oblivious, to be subsumed into something higher. Here I want to pose something that seems to be in direct opposition to this. Why? Because we know that the Mesiras Nefesh seems also to be by non-Jews. Besides for the fact that Rabbi says is that there's an opinion that says that non-Jews have to give up their life for the Sheva Mitzvahs for the 7 Noahide laws, for belief in Hashem. What first of the 7 Noahide laws is belief in Hashem. So if somebody challenges their belief in Hashem or take their life, they have to also give up their life. So where's that coming from? But besides for that, not even talking about holy Mesiras Nefesh. Simply, we know that there are examples lahavdil, to distinguish between Jewish Mesiras Nefesh and what we're going to mention now, when people, because of their belief in something, allowed themselves to be killed because of their beliefs or because of their opinions. Yeah. So how could it be? If you're explaining that Avraham Avinu brings this pure concept of self-sacrifice to the world and brings it to the world, and now his children have that ability, but it seems to be that this is a very natural thing. We know that people give up their lives for a cause, for a religion, because they believe in something very strongly. So why is that something unique that Avraham Avinu has to introduce? Says the Rebbe, we can explain as follows. The fact that a person is ready to give away his life for Hashem's, for Hashem's ways, that doesn't yet clarify that this is the real pure concept of Mesiras Nefesh and walking away from his own entity and his own ego, subsuming his Metzias into Hashem. Why not? Because it could be that he gives up his life because intellectually he comes to the understanding that the thing he's standing up for is more important to him even than life. By giving up his life, he's going to achieve something greater. Now it can be greater for himself, it can be greater for his people. Sometimes people give up their lives for their nation. It can be for his religion, for his beliefs. It could be because he wants to be written about as a hero. He's thinking about his legacy. He'll give up his life. Sometimes people think about some people are paid to give up their lives, and they leave a pension for their terrorists. They can leave a pension for somebody else, for their families. So this is all not bittul. This is not walking away from their Metzias, from their entity. On the contrary, because the Mesiras Nefesh that's totally built on rationalization, on a calculation, that can also exist lahavdil by non-Jews. In other words, it makes the calculation that through giving up his life, he is going to benefit something. Or, in other words, not his Metzias, not that his entity and ego is going to be oblivious. The contrary, it's going to grow. They're going to talk about this heroic person. He's going to have more of a presence, not less. It's going to be more of a presence conceptually because physically he won't be here, but it doesn't matter. There's still more of him, not less of him. Or on the other hand, he could get to a place in life where he thinks, if I don't have this particular thing, what's life worth to me? Sometimes it could be a natzchana, sometimes it could be a competitive thing. This person has made me so upset that if I don't beat him, I don't want to. And sometimes it's tamut nafshi and plishtim. Sometimes it's, I don't care if the person says he doesn't care if he dies, as long as he gets the other guy at the same time. So he hasn't become less. There's a personal reason there. It's not a egoless reason. And Mesiras Nefesh, true Mesiras Nefesh, the way we talk about it in the context of Avraham Avinu and of Yiddishkeit and of halacha, is that the person gives away the nefesh. We said nefesh also means rotzen, person's identity, the person's desires. The person gives away literally dem ich, the I, the ego, the self-identity. Person in Mesiras Nefesh in its purest concept, the way it's taught by Avraham Avinu, the person gives himself totally over to Hashem, a commitment and a dedication that's totally higher than any form of cheshbonis, any form of calculation, of thoughts, of intellectual rationalizations, or even of emotional compulsion. Sometimes people are so emotionally compelled, they're going to give up their life. No, we're talking about Mesiras Nefesh, where simply there's one thing. There's Hashem, and there's the feeling, there's the understanding that outside of Hashem, I don't want to have an independent existence. My life is nothing without Hashem. If it means that my life is taken, that doesn't matter, because true life is not about me. It's about being one with the source, being one with Hashem. Yeah, Shlomo says that Rebbe, paragraph 6, we could say that in a revealed way, where did we see this kind of bittul, this kind of egoless and total surrender to Hashem? Without any doubt, some kind of an act that you can see is so pure, you can't ascribe any other reason to it, any other rationalization, any other motivation other than simple Mesiras Nefesh. It's dafke in the test of the Akedah, even more than the test of Urkastim, in the fiery furnace. Why? The Mesiras Nefesh, Avraham Avinu was giving up his life and being prepared to be thrown into the fiery furnace in Urgastim. It expressed itself in the fact that Avraham, why was he challenged? He was spreading Hashem's name in the world, spreading about belief in one Hashem. Now, it could be, if we look at this story, if somebody analyzes the story from the outside, they say, one second, Avraham Avinu was the founder of a movement which he passionately believed, the movement of monotheism, a belief in one God. Possibly, people may say, he's ready to give up his life for it. You know why? Because he was so convinced, he was so motivated, he was so compelled to change the lie of the world, where the world, as is expressed in the Rambam, was meshamish ba'afela. The world was groping in the dark, in idolatrous dark, and he was so compelled, so much believed in his mission to tell the world the truth, that he wasn't prepared to listen to anything that stood in his way. If he had to get thrown in the fire, he got thrown in the fire. However, when it comes to the Akedah, with the Akedah in and of itself, the actual act where Hashem says, go up to the mountain and kill and slaughter, bring as a carbon your child, there was no other thing there that you could attribute to this act other than Yirei Elikim Atah. You are fearing of God, you're doing because Hashem said so. And that's why Avraham Avinu did it, simply because Hashem said so. Even, square brackets, even the concept of spreading Hashem's greatness in the world to show Avraham Avinu is prepared even to take the life of his beloved son for Hashem, that would have made headlines. But there would have been no headlines. You know why? Because, like the Ibn Ezra says, when he offered up when he was instructed to offer up, and he went there to offer up his son, even his close attendants, his lads, his boys that went with him, till a certain point were no longer there. He said, him and Yitzchak, just him and Yitzchak, nobody would have been there to tell the story. On the contrary, in a way, if we're thinking about Avraham Avinu's message, a mission to spread Hashem in the world, this is in stark opposition to that. Why? because by bringing up Yitzchak and ending Yitzchak's life, bringing him up as a sacrifice, that would have uprooted totally the new movement that Avraham Avinu launched. Because who could have been the continuation after Avraham Avinu passes? Only Yitzchak. And now he's gone and he's wiped out the whole mission. So there's nothing that makes any sense about this Mesiras Nefesh. It's total, Hashem said, and he does. There cannot be any other ascription. There cannot be any other motivation or will or calculation ascribed to the Nisayon of the Akedah. The whole concept of the Mesiras Nefesh, the sacrifice of the Akedah, was only Hashem wanted, Hashem asked for it, and Avraham does. And this is the specialty, this is the novelty of the test of the Akedah, which Avraham Avinu withstood. The Akedah Mesiras Nefesh was in a way that doesn't make any sense, doesn't have any rationalization. It's simply the wish of Hashem, and therefore, this expresses what we discussed earlier, Bitul, Hametzius, Betachlis, the total subsuming, the total nullification, cancellation of the person's own identity, own reality, own ego, becoming fully one with Hashem. Pasuk, here the Rebbe takes it a step deeper. Step deeper is the Ran. Remember we mentioned the Ran, that the Ran says Kach na, please. It wasn't even an instruction, a full instruction. So based on what we explained till now, we'll now understand when the Ran explains that it's not a Lashon Tzivui, it's not an instruction. We could say that makes it even less connected to calculation. It's not even a mitzvah for Avraham Avinu, because subtly, if it would be a mitzvah, so Avraham Avinu is doing it for all the right reasons, but deep down he's also at least, he's doing something that will end the future of spreading Hashem's name, but at least he's done a mitzvah. If you say it wasn't even a full mitzvah, so then you're saying he knew he doesn't have any benefit from it. Not it's really a mitzvah for him. It's simply because he understood Hashem said to do it. He has no part anymore. In other words, there's no benefit for him in any way possible. Simply Hashem said so. Total Mesiras Nefesh. Says the Rebbe in Ha'ara 44 that this fact that the Akedah is something that the only base of doing it, because Hashem asked for it, this would then be what we call the Netinat Koach Mehaboreh, the power given by Hashem, which is then drawn down and opened by Avraham. In other words, everything that we do from below always has to start with an opportunity given to us from Hashem. So the fact that Hashem instructed on the Akedah, this then allowed Avraham, by fulfilling it, Hashem gave him the power to be able to fulfill it, to be able to open up something new in the world, to be able to draw down the ability to connect to Hashem in a Mesiras Nefesh, which is totally defies any kind of reason, totally allows the created being to reach beyond his state of creation. Now that we've put the Akedah on this slide, it's paragraph 7, now we'll understand why the Gemara says that Hashem says, please fulfill this one, because otherwise they'll say, Ein mamash barishonim, the first ones were nothing. What do you mean the first ones were nothing? Well, we're saying like this. If God forbid Avraham Avinu wouldn't have withstood the Nisayon of offering his son, we would have said, Yoimru, they would have said, those that are looking from the outside, and those that are trying to see, maybe Avraham Avinu is not so pure, they would have said, you know what? The previous tests were because they fit in with Avraham Avinu's seichel, with his holy seichel, with his holy intellect, but they fit into his vision of the future of this movement. However, Mesiras Nefesh mamish, that a person should really give himself up without any rhyme or without any reason, like the Akedah, maybe not. Any idea? We don't know if Avraham is prepared to do that, and if so, really, we question whether the earlier Nisyonot were real Mesiras Nefesh. Ein mamash, yes, they were good achievements, but they may just be a continuation of his own mitzios, of his own entity. If you find somebody who gives up his life, and then you find out that he was talking all the time about his legacy. He wants to exit the world with a bang, with a big legacy. You discover retroactively that his sacrifice was not sacrifice. It was self-aggrandizement. It was trying to build himself in some way. So good, here, chas v'shalom, it's not like that. But it's, al kopanim, it's seichel de kedusha. It's at least a rationalization, a holy rationalization, but a rationalization, not pure mesiras nefesh. Through the fact that Avraham Avinu withstood the Akedah, you know what that did? This showed Lemafreya, this showed retroactively that also the first tests that the Avraham Avinu withstood was with full mesiras nefesh. It wasn't because of his own rationalization. That also was from the same place, but we wouldn't see it. If we wouldn't have this final test, we would say in Mamash Rishonim, we wouldn't be able to judge the earlier tests as being the power that they are, which is total bittul mitzias, total giving himself up without any rationalization. We would say maybe there was mitzias there, maybe there was at least mitzias dikdush, there was some kind of a rationalization. That's why he did it. But now that he was ready to do full, give up his son, that's it. No rationalization. Now we understand. This is a guy who from the first Akedah, from Ur Kasdim, was thinking about one thing, thinking about Hashem. And it follows through all the 9 Nisyonos till the 10th one. This is just somebody who simply gives up everything he has for Hashem. Paragraph 8. This is also the explanation where we said that the opening up of Mesiras Nefesh in the world that Avraham Avinu did is got to do with Dafka, not Ur Kasdim, not the fiery furnace, but with offering up his son. Because when we talk about opening up the channel, the pipe from Mesiras Nefesh, means that Avraham Avinu bequeathed that, gave this in a way of inheritance to his children, to the Jewish people, the ability, the power to have literal self-sacrifice, emes Mesiras Nefesh. To the extent that really the way we look at every Jew is that they have, not just Avraham Avinu opened the ability, but he bequeathed that ability, and it's implanted in the depth and in the point, in the most essential point of the neshama, which is why we say, and this is even a halacha. The halacha is a fascinating halacha that we know in the laws of divorce. A person, a man, can only give a divorce if he does it willingly. Get. Rabbeinu Gershom said that the woman also has to accept it willingly, but from the din of Torah, a woman can be forced to accept it, to receive a get. Today, not. Again, 1,000 years ago, Rabbeinu Gershom said not. She has to also agree to it. But the man, according to the law of the Torah, he has to give it willingly. What happens if he's a bad person and the Beis Din decides that he needs to give his wife a get and he doesn't want? The halacha is, you've got to be careful with this today, but in the time when there is a Beis Din that's able to administer lashes and punishments, and real punishments, physical punishments, they beat him. Kofinoto, they force him. Achi Amar Otzani says, I want. Anybody looking on knows if 10 minutes ago he says, no way in the world is he going to give this get. Stop beating him. He says, okay, yeah, I want to give the get. You want? And we accept it as a kosher get? Says the Rambam, yes. The Gemara tells us that every Yid really wants to do what Hashem wants. If the Beis Din said this person should not stay married to this woman, he has to give her a divorce, has to give her a get, that's what he wants, deep down. Every Yid wants at the deepest core of his existence, he wants connection to Hashem. Can't disconnect himself to Hashem. In the case of the get, when he says, I don't want, and then we beat him, he says, I don't want. So we're looking at in his deepest sense, of course he wants to do what Hashem wants. The Beis Din says he has to get divorced. Externally, he doesn't want. So we beat up the external. Now the external says, I do want. Now the external, the internal are on the same page, and now it can work. So that becomes a halacha that every Yid desires and is existentially in a state of not wanting to be disconnected for Hashem, ready to give up his life for Hashem. That's why, listen to this, if a Jew gives up his life for Hashem, even if it may look to the onlookers that there's some kind of external reason, he was just trying to create a legacy. What we know is that really deep down what the motivation is, that the Jew is giving away his entire being, even his nefesh alikis, is giving away his entire physicality and spirituality without any calculation, to stay with Hashem, just like the Nesayim of the Akedah. The Rabbi is saying that really we're being told something about ourselves that we can't really feel and we can't really know. The Alter Rebbe says that you can see mostly, if you look historically, mostly Jews that thought they didn't care about Hashem gave up their life for Hashem. And there's no motivation there, there's no other reason. And so a person can realize that I have no obligation to say I'm any worse than those very, very simple or uncaring, uncaring Jews. I would probably also give up my life for Hashem. Now, the Rebbe uses it as a way to give us to understand if you're ready to give up your life for Hashem, and you are, so give up a few little wants, so live your life for Hashem. But the Rebbe is saying here that how do this level, this highest level of Mesiras Nefesh that Avraham Avinu shows in the Akedah, which shows that his whole life is like that, also has an effect on us, because it shows that when we give up our lives for Hashem, or we give up something for Hashem, deep down it's connected to the deepest level of surrender to Hashem, like Avraham Avinu. He opened up the tziner, he opened up the spigot, and he put it into us literally. That's what Alter Rebbe says in Shulchan Aruch. It's good to say every day the portion that this talks about, Psukim in the Torah, that talk about the sacrificing of Avraham, of Yitzchak. Also, in order, first of all, to remember the great merit of Avraham Avinu. We're asking Hashem praying to Hashem, He should give us all good things. So we want to bring meritorious things. We come from an ancestor who is ready to do the utmost for Hashem. But there's another thing. Also, in order to subjugate his own impulse, la'avod Hashem yitbarach, and rather than going after his physical impulses, he should serve Hashem, just like Masai Yitzchak Nafsho, just like Yitzchak was prepared, gave himself up for Hashem. So the Rebbe questions, it sounds like we're being told to say it so that we should act like Yitzchak in giving ourselves over in the sacrifice to Hashem. How can a person compare his own inner struggle to overcome his own impulse to being the same caliber as Yitzchak, the great Yitzchak, giving up his life for Hashem? Says the Rebbe, but because Avraham Avinu was the one who opened up the power of Mesiras Nefesh, so whenever a Jew does an act, a Jew who's from the seed of Avraham, from the progeny of Avraham, a child and an inheritor of Avraham, Morasha Kilat Yaakov, and we know that the Torah is an inheritance of the congregation of Jacob. We get things by inheritance. So any time any of us opens up our hearts, to subjugate and control their own impulses and their own desires to serve Hashem the way, just like Yitzchak gave up his life, it is exactly as if Avraham Avinu is taking him to the binding, because that's what we're saying is that's the true desire of every single Jew, to be connected to Hashem beyond any motivation, beyond any reasons, simply because he's a part of Hashem and he wants to go back to his source. He understands and he feels and he knows that he can't be separated from Hashem in any way. That's the Sikha. There's a footnote here which calls our attention to famous story that the Alter Rebbe describes in Torah. And that story, I'm not going to go into it now, but basically, I said a story. Let's say the story. Story is that Rabbi Chanina ben Tradian was sitting and he was teaching Torah, and the Romans were there. And the Romans didn't allow you to teach Torah publicly. And Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma, he went to visit Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma, who was his teacher. Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma said, "I heard about you, Rabbi Chanina ben Tradian, that you are teaching Torah publicly. The Romans, I wouldn't be surprised if the Romans kill you with a Sefer Torah around you." So what? He says, "What am I going to have the world to come?" Said Rabbi Chanina ben Tradian. Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma says, "I'm not sure. Tell me something about your life. Tell me a story where you feel you did something, you overcame your own impulse." So he says, "I'll tell you, once I was collecting money for the poor people on Purim, and I had my own money that I was going to buy my own meal for Purim, and they got mixed up. And rather than try and figure out how much was mine, how much was theirs, I just let the whole thing go, and I gave the whole thing to the poor people." Said Rabbi Yosef ben Kisma, "If so, I hope I have a portion like you in Olam Haba, the world to come." And indeed, Rabbi Chanina was killed, and so on. Alter Rebbe questions, this is a man who's obviously flaunting the Romans, which means he's having Mesiras Nefesh. He knows he's going to lose his life for teaching Torah publicly. And Rabbi Yosef Mikis was not sure if he's going to get Olam Haba. He asked him, tell me a story. When he tells him a story about some, how much money could it have been? Some amount of money that wasn't sure if it's his or the poor, and he let it go to the poor. Oh, now I know you're a Ben Olam Haba. Says the Alter Rebbe. The explanation here is very simple, very much along the lines. The Rebbe makes reference to in a footnote. There's a concept that it could be that somebody is so intellectual, so much into his philosophy and belief, that life without that belief or without that philosophy is not worth anything. If I can't teach Torah, not necessarily Torah, it could be the Alter Rebbe says there are great philosophers we know in the world that lost their life because they wouldn't back down from their innovative philosophies that were against the stream of the time. To a true intellect, to somebody who truly lives in his mind, life without being able to live with that freedom is not worth anything. That could also be by learning Torah. It could be he was so much involved in his Torah that he couldn't imagine life without it. He couldn't stop. Even for the Romans, he wouldn't stop. But that's not Mesiras Nefesh. As he said here, if there's something motivating you, it's not your Mesiras Nefesh. So he asked him, do you have any story? And he told him a story which showed that if it would be, he showed him a story that he gave up his own money to give to the poor. Now, observes the Alter Rebbe, somebody who is very studious and cares so deeply about intellect and so on. Usually, there's something else that happens with that studiousness, and that is a tinge of stinginess. Usually not so. People that are, they're free with their money, try and get them to focus and hone down on something with real intense concentration. No, usually it's two separate skill sets. So now Rabbi Yosef Mikis said, tell me something you did. When he gave him this story of something he did that was totally against his nature, so he says, now I see what motivates you is Hashem, not what your nature is. So now I know that by you teaching Torah, flaunting the Romans, not because of your nature. It's because your connection to Hashem. It's because your connection to Hashem, then you're going to Olam Haba for sure. And this is like in Avraham, we say, now I know that you're fearing God because till now you did things that could be attributed to your love of God. And the Rebbe takes it a step further and says, till now, even the self-sacrifice could be attributed to some kind of a personal motivation. This Akedah shows you are motivated, no personal motivation whatsoever. It's total surrender, Mesiras Nefesh to Hashem. And if that's the case, all the other Nisyanes are also true. Says the Rebbe, and here's the beauty for us. This tells us, doesn't matter what it looks like from the outside. Whenever a Jew overcomes himself, it doesn't have to be giving up his life, whenever he subjugates and controls his own desire in favor of doing what Hashem wants, not what he wants, it's a geder. It's coming from that same motivational place, not motivational place, and that's some selfless place, that's some piece of God that Avraham Avinu bequeathed to us, and this tells us our big power.